Hello, everybody. This is Jeremiah with Man with a Mug, and I'm really glad you're here. We're going to dive back in to Walden. Last time I read this, I was upstairs because my wife was sleeping in the basement with the heat wave in the Northeast here in the US, and my toddler was asleep, and I figured I'd try to be quiet and whisper everything. That didn't work. So, I'm going to get back into Walden today, still talking about shelter. I kind of left off last time I was reading because I felt really convicted by the general message. Um, and I just kind of had to slow down and think about it and process it real time with you guys. So appreciate your patience with me. Also, if I keep glancing over the side here, it's because the baby monitor's over here and I'm just checking on my toddler, making sure he's okay. It's the evening time as I'm recording this, and I just put him down for bed. He he likes to roll around for a while. He's very calm. He's very happy to just roll around in his crib for the most part. Um, but I'll usually take a little bit to go to sleep. He likes to roll around for sometimes like an hour. I would say an hour and a half before he actually falls asleep. It's pretty funny. And not upset, not crying. He has a couple stuffed animals in there, so he's just having a good time. We have here, this is one of my favorite mugs. This comes with a set. We got this, my wife and I, for our wedding, and there are matching plates for it. It's really fun. One of my favorite ones, just brings back good memories. And decaf green tea today. All right, let's get back to some Walden. I'm trying to figure out a good part to stop. I, you know this. I don't pre-read usually, so we're just gonna dive right in. I think I found a good place to stop just from a couple of page flips. Yeah, anyway, still talking about shelter. It is the luxurious and dissipated who set the fashions which the herds so diligently follow. The traveler who stops at the best houses, so called, soon discovers this, for the publicans presume him to be a Sardanapolis. Sardanapolis. I definitely didn't pronounce that correctly. And yeah, that's a weird word. And if he resigned himself to the tender mercies, he would soon be completely emasculated. I think that in the railroad car, we are inclined to spend more on luxury than on safety and convenience, and it threatens, without attaining these, to become no better than a modern drawing room, with its divans and ottomans and sunshades and 100 other oriental things, which we are taking west with us, invented for the ladies of the harem. It's harem. Ladies of the harem and the effeminate natives of the Celestial Empire, which Jonathan should be ashamed to know the names of. Dang, just throwing Jonathan under the bus there. It's a bad day to be named Jonathan in this book. I would rather sit on a pumpkin and have it all to myself than be crowded on a velvet cushion. I would rather ride on earth in an ox cart with a free circulation than to go to heaven in the fancy car of an excursion train and breathe a malaria all the way. The very simplicity and nakedness of man's life as the primitive ages imply this advantage, at least that they left him still but a sojourner in nature. When he was refreshed with food and sleep, he contemplated his journey again. He dwelt, as it were, in a tent in this world, and was either threading the valleys or crossing the plains or climbing the mountain tops. But lo, men have become the tools of their tools. The man is become lost my place. The man who independently plucked the flutes. The man who independently plucked the fruits when he was hungry is become a farmer, and he who stood under a tree for shelter, a housekeeper. We now no longer camp as for a night, but have settled down on earth and forgotten heaven. We have adopted Christianity merely as an improved method of agriculture. We have built for this world a family mansion, and for the next a family tomb. The best works of art are the expressions of man's struggle to free himself from this condition, but the effect of our art is merely to make this low state comfortable, and that higher state to be forgotten. There is actually no place in this village for a work of fine art. If any had come down to us to stand for our lives, our houses and streets furnish no proper pedestal for it. There is not a nail to hang a picture on, nor a shelf to receive the bust of a hero or a saint. When I consider how our houses are built and paid for, and or not paid for, and their internal economy, lost my place again, and their internal economy managed and sustained, I wonder that the floor does not give way under the visitor while he is admiring the gewgaws under the mantelpiece, and let him through into the cellar to some solid and honest though earthy foundation. Excuse me. I cannot but perceive that the so-called rich and refined life is a thing jumped art, and I do not get in on the enjoyment of the fine arts which adorn it. my attention being wholly occupied with the jump. For I remember that well, tongue tied today. Let's take a sip of tea. For I remember that the greatest genuine leap, due to human muscles alone, on record, is that of certain wandering Arabs, who are said to have cleared 25 feet of level ground. On level ground. Without fictitious support, man is sure to come to earth again beyond that distance. The first question which I am tempted to put on the proprietor of such great impropriety is, who bolsters you? Are you one of the 97 who fail, or the 3 who succeed? Answer me these questions, and then perhaps I may look at your baubles and find them ornamental. The cart before the horse is neither beautiful nor useful. Before we can adorn our houses with beautiful objects, the walls must be stripped, and our lives must be stripped, and beautiful housekeeping and beautiful living be laid for a foundation. Now, a taste for the beautiful is most cultivated out of doors, where there is no house and no housekeeper. Old Johnson, in his wonder-working Providence, speaking of the first settlers of his town, with whom he was contemporary, tells us that they burrow themselves in the earth for their first shelter under some hillside, and casting the soil aloft upon timber, they make a smoky fire against the earth at the highest side. They did not provide them houses, say he, till the earth by the Lord's blessing brought forth bread to feed them. And the first year's crop was so light that they were forced to cut their bread very thin for a long season. The secretary of the province of New Netherland, writing in Dutch in 1650, for the information of those who wish to take up land there, states more particularly that those in New Netherland, and especially in New England, who have no means to build farmhouses at first according to their wishes, dig a square pit in the ground, cellar fashion, 6 or 7 feet deep, as long and as broad as they think proper, case the earth inside with wood all around the wall, and line the wood with the bark of trees or something else to prevent the caving in of the earth. Floor this cellar with plank, and wainscot its overhead for a ceiling. Raise the roof of spars clear up, excuse me, and cover the spars with bark or green sods, so that they can live dry and warm in these houses with their entire families for 2, 3, and 4 years, it being understood that partitions are run through those cellars, which are adapted to the size of the family. The wealthy and principal men in New England, in the beginning of the colonies, commenced of their first dwelling. I read that incorrectly. The wealthy and principal men in New England, in the beginning of the colonies, commenced their first dwelling houses in this fashion for 2 reasons. Firstly, in order not to waste time in building, and not to want food the next season. Secondly, in order not to discourage poor laboring people, whom they brought over in numbers from fatherland. In the course of 3 or 4 years, when the country became adapted to agriculture, they built themselves handsome houses, spending on them several thousands. In this course which our ancestors took, there was a show of prudence at least, as if their principle were to satisfy the more pressing wants first. But are the more pressing wants satisfied now? When I think of acquiring for myself one of our luxurious dwellings, I am deterred, for so to speak, the country is not yet adapted to human culture, and we are still forced to cut our spiritual bread far thinner than our forefathers did their wheaten. It's the word wheat with an E in at the end. I guess it was just plural for wheat back then. Who knows? Or another way to say bread. I don't know. Not that all architectural ornament is to be neglected, even in the rudest periods, but let our houses first be lined with beauty, where they come in contact with our lives, like the tenement of the shellfish, and not overlaid with it. But alas, I have been inside 1 or 2 of them, and know what they are lined with. Though we are not so degenerate but that we might possibly live in a cave or a wigwam or wear skins today, it certainly is better to accept the advantages, though so dearly bought, with the invention and industry of mankind offer. In a neighborhood as this, boards and shingles, lime and bricks are cheaper and more easily obtained than suitable caves or whole logs, or bark in sufficient quantities, or even well-tempered clay or flat stones. I speak understandingly on this subject, for I have made myself acquainted with it both theoretically and practically. With a little more wit, we might use these materials so as to become richer than the richest now are, and make our civilization a blessing. The civilized man is a more experienced and wiser savage. But to make haste to my own experiment, near the end of March 1845, I borrowed an axe and went down to the woods by Walden Pond, nearest to where I intended to build my house, and began to cut down some tall, arrowy white pines still in their youth for timber. It is difficult to begin without borrowing, but perhaps it is the most generous course thus to permit your fellow men to have an interest in your enterprise. The owner of the axe, as he released his hold on it, said it was the apple of his eye, but I returned it sharper than I received it. It was a pleasant hillside where I worked, covered with pine woods, through which I looked out on the pond, and a small open field in the woods where pines and hickories were springing up. The ice in the pond was not yet dissolved, though there were some open spaces, and it was all dark colored and saturated with water. There were some slight flurries of snow during the days that I worked there, but for the most part, when I came out onto the railroad on my way home, its yellow sand heap stretched away gleaming in the hazy atmosphere, and the rails shone in the spring sun, and I heard the lark and peewee and other birds already come to commence another year with us. They were pleasant spring days, in which the winter of man's discontent was thawing as well as the earth, and the life that had lain torpid began to stretch itself. One day, when my axe had come off and I had cut a green hickory for a wedge, driving it with a stone, and had placed the hole to soak in a pond, and had placed the hole to soak in a pond hole in order to swell the wood, I saw a striped snake run into the water, and he lay on the bottom, apparently without inconvenience, as long as I stayed there, for more than a quarter of an hour, perhaps because he had not fairly come out of the torpid state. It appeared to me that for like reason men remain in their present low and primitive condition, but if they should feel the influence of the spring of springs arousing them, they would of necessity rise to a higher and more ethereal life. I had previously seen the snakes in frosty mornings on my path with portions of their bodies still numb and inflexible, waiting for the sun to thaw them. On the 1st of April, it rained and melted the ice, and in the early part of the day, which was very foggy, I heard a stray goose groping about over the pond and cackling as if lost, or like the spirit of the fog. So I went on for some days cutting and hewing timber, and also studs and rafters, all with my narrow axe, not having many communicable or scholar-like thoughts, singing to myself, "Men say they know many things, but lo, they have taken wings. The arts and sciences, and 1,000 appliances, the wind that blows is all that anybody knows." I hewed the main timbers 6 inches square, most of the studs on 2 sides only, and the rafters and floor timbers on one side, leaving the rest of the bark on, so that they were just as straight and much stronger than sawed ones. Each stick was carefully mortised or tenoned by its stump, for I had borrowed other tools by this time. My days in the woods were not very long ones, yet I usually carried my dinner of bread and butter and read the newspaper in which it was wrapped, at noon, sitting amid the green pine boughs which I had cut off, and to my bread was imparted some of their fragrance, for my hands were covered with a thick coat of pitch. Before I had done, I was more the friend than the foe of the pine tree, though I had cut down some of them, having become better acquainted with it. Sometimes a rambler in the wood was attracted by the sound of my axe, and we chatted pleasantly over the chips which I had made. By the middle of April, for I made no haste in my work, but rather made the most of it, my house was framed and ready for the raising. I had already bought the shanty of James Collins, an Irishman who worked on the Fitchburg Railroad, for boards. James Collins's shanty was considered an uncommonly fine one. When I called to see if he was not at home, I walked about the outside, at first unobserved from within, the window was so deep and high. It was of small dimensions, with a peaked cottage roof, and not much else to be seen, the dirt being raised 5 feet all around as if it were a compost heap. The roof was the soundest part, though a good deal warped and made brittle by the sun. Door sill there was none, but a perennial passage for the hens under the doorboard. Mrs. C came to the door and asked me to view it from the inside. The hens were driven in by my approach. It was dark and had a dirt floor for the most part, dank, clammy, and aguish. Only here a board here, only here a board, and there a board, which would not bear removal. She lighted a lamp to show me the inside of the roofs and the roof and the walls, and also the board excuse me, and also that the board floor extended under the bed, warning me not to step into the cellar, a sort of dust hole 2 feet deep. In her own words, there were good boards overhead, good boards all around, and a good window. Of 2 whole squares originally, only the cat had passed out that way lately. There was a stove, a bed, and a place to sit, an infant in the house where it was born, a silk parasol, gilt-framed looking-glass, and a patent new coffee mill nailed to an oak sapling, all told, excuse me. The bargain was soon concluded, for James had in the meanwhile returned. I had to pay $4.25 tonight, he to vacate at 5 tomorrow morning, selling to nobody else meanwhile. I had to take possession at 6. It were well, he said, to be there early, and anticipate certain indistinct but wholly unjust claims on the score of ground rent and fuel. This, he assured me, was the only encumbrance. At 6, I passed him and his family on the road. One large bundle held their all: bed, coffee mill, looking-glass, hens, all but the cat. She took to the woods and became a wildcat, as I learned afterward, trod in a trap set for woodchucks, and so became a dead cat, at last. I took down this dwelling the same morning, drawing the nails and removed it to the pond side by small cartloads, spreading the boards on the grassy there, on the grassy there. Excuse me, what? Spreading the boards on the grass there. Whoops. To breach. To breach. Let me start that over. Sip of tea. Back to it. Sometimes you just need to take a sip of tea and reset whatever you're doing. I took down this dwelling the same morning, drawing the nails, and removed it to the pond side by small cartloads, spreading the boards on the grass there to bleach and warp it back again in the sun. One early thrush gave me a note or two as I drove along the woodland path. I was informed treacherously by a young Patrick, that neighbor Seeley, an Irishman, in the intervals of the carting, transferred the still tolerable straight and drivable nails, staples, and spikes to his pocket, and then stood when I came back to pass the time of day, and looked freshly up, unconcerned with spring thoughts at the devastation. There being a dearth of work, as he said. He was there to represent spectatordom, and help make this seemingly insignificant event one with the removal of the gods of Troy. I dug my cellar on the side of a hill sloping to the south, where a woodchuck had formerly dug his burrow, down through sumac and blackberry roots, and the lowest stain of vegetation, 6 feet square by 7 deep, to a fine sand where potatoes would not freeze in any winter. Excuse me, I'm hiccuping a little bit from the tea. The sides were left shelving and not stoned, but the sun having never shone on them, the sand still keeps its place. It was but 2 hours' work. I took particular pleasure in this breaking of ground, for in almost all latitudes men dig into the earth for an equable. I almost said equitable, but it's not equitable. Equable temperature. We'll go with that. Under the most splendid house in the city is still to be found the cellar where they store their roots as of old, and long after the superstructure, he disappeared posterity remark, what? Ah, I saw the word has and thought it said he. Maybe I'm reading too fast. Maybe I need to slow down. Under the most splendid house in the city is still to be found the cellar, where they store their roots as of old, and long after the superstructure has disappeared, posterity remark its dent in the earth. The house is still but a sort of porch at the entrance of a burrow. At length, in the beginning of May, with the help of some of my acquaintances, rather to improve so good an occasion for neighborliness than from any necessity, I set up the frame of my house. No man was ever more honored in the character of his raisers than I. They are destined, I trust, to assist at the raising of loftier structures one day. I began to occupy my house on the 4th of July. As soon as it was boarded and roofed, for the boards were carefully feather-edged and lapped, so that it was perfectly impervious to rain. But before boarding, I laid the foundation of a chimney at one end, bringing 2 cartloads of stones up the hill from the pond in my arms. I built the chimney after my hoeing in the fall, before a fire became necessary for warmth, doing my cooking in the meanwhile out of doors on the ground early in the morning, which mode I still think is in some respects, more convenient and agreeable than the usual one. When it stormed before my bread was baked, I fixed a few boards over the fire and sat under them to watch my loaf, and passed some pleasant hours in that way. In those days when my hands were much employed, I read but little, but the least scraps of paper which lay on the ground. My holder or tablecloth afforded me as much entertainment, in fact, answered the same purpose as the Iliad. That's interesting. I'll stop right there for today. I was so floored by, I wouldn't say floored, it's not like a novel concept to me, but I love this, where he borrowed an axe, and the owner said, hey, it's the apple of my eye, it's my favorite axe, but he said, but I returned it sharper than I received it. That's such an seemingly insignificant line in the whole thing, but it kind of gets at the message of what Thoreau's really getting at. He's wanting to get back to a better state, to leave his life better than where he found it, and in general to leave the world better than which he found it. And that's a really good way to live life, is to leave something better than you found it. If you're borrowing someone's car, fill the gas tank up when you get back. If you're sleeping at a hotel or maybe someone's guest room, strip the sheets for them before you leave. Save them the time, save them the work. If you're being hosted at someone's house for dinner, do the dishes afterwards as a way to say thank you. There are little ways to make the world a little better place. And I think one of the easiest ways to do it is to leave things better than when you found it. And you can do that with yourself too. It's kind of a metaphor for life. You don't always get to control where you started. You don't get to control your circumstances. You don't get to control, sometimes you don't control your environment, but you always have a choice to change what happens next. I need to live by that sometimes. You always have a choice as to what happens next. You don't always get to choose where you came from, but you always choose how to move forward from it. Even with emotions, there's always a moment between the stimulus and the response. As emotions go, someone says something to you, makes you feel upset, or you're disappointed by something, or you're really happy about something. It goes both ways. You feel that, and then you respond to it. But there, in between that stimulus and response, there is a moment where you get to choose how you respond. And not a lot of people know that. And it took me a long time to figure that out, and I'm still reminding myself of that every day. To leave things better than when you found it, either in life or inside yourself, you get to choose that. If you're feeling an emotion, you get to choose how you react out of that emotion. Could be negatively, could be positively. And in life, you don't always get to choose where you come from, but you can always choose where to end up. I don't know. I really like that. Leave the axe sharper than when you found it. Sharpen your axe. Or just leave things better than you found it. And if you borrow something, of course, the more concrete thing is if you borrow something, take good care of it. Enough said. Be a good steward of what you've been given. I'm going to stop there. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see y'all next time. I was going to get up, and I was like, this is going to fall right off. So, okay, I'll see you next time.